To begin, I feel like we all understand bullying. It's been a prominent social problem for many, many decades. And I feel like we all have our stories. Maybe you haven't been personally targeted. Maybe you haven't been the one who has been the aggressor, but I bet you've seen it happen. Maybe to a best friend, maybe to a classmate, maybe to an acquaintance. And when I hang out with adults even now and I ask them to tell me about their lives growing up, they might not be able to remember everything, but they can very vividly recollect instances of them being harassed or threatened or humiliated. And it's just interesting how it gets burned indelibly into our minds and maybe even into our hearts and perhaps shapes us as we get older. So we understand traditional bullying, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's playground, whether it's in a hallway or in the lunchroom. Cyberbullying is just using technology to commit the same sorts of offenses. We have an academic definition, which is willful and repeated harm inflicted through the use of computers and cell phones and other electronic devices, such as a gaming console, perhaps. Simply put, just take your traditional ideas of real-world bullying and just amend them using the technology. Bullying and cyberbullying, again, it's continuing to happen, but when we think about cyberbullying or online harassment, it tends to happen wherever kids congregate. And you've heard of the most popular sites, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, or whether it's, as I alluded to, a gaming network such as PlayStation Network or Xbox Live. It's going to happen. But what I want to say here is that the vast, vast majority of kids are doing the right things using technology. They're being respectful. They're not being a moron. They're not being a jerk. They have good heads on their shoulders. However, with that said, in any medium, in any venue, there's going to be some who misuse what's available and perhaps take the time to be hurtful and cruel and malicious towards others. But my point there is that it's not the technology, and we can't be blaming the technology. Typically the issues, and I know that Brooks is going to talk about this, are more related to conflict resolution and socio-emotional skills and so forth that then eventually bubble up and perhaps become bullying or cyberbullying down the road. I've been studying this for over a decade, and when it comes to online bullying, the percentages out there amongst youth in our nation, it's right around 25%. So again, 1 out of 4 of the kids that you know have been bullied online. If you're curious about real-world bullying, again, lunchroom, playground, classroom, it's right around 35 to 40% of kids over the course of their lives have been bullied in the real world. When it comes to offending, online offending, it's right around 17, 18%. So again, 17 or 18% of the kids that you know have bullied somebody else online. When you're thinking about real-world bullying, aggressors are right about 30 to 33%. And my point in sharing with you these statistics is simply that we hear sometimes it's an epidemic, it's spiraling out of control. That's not true. And those sort of messages force us to perhaps become a little bit irrational with how we deal with the issue. Now, you and I will totally agree. It merits our attention. It demands our response. But again, we need to be rational in how we approach it. What can we do? Where do we even start? We know it's affecting our kids, but my first sort of a reminder to us is that we need to not freak out. Most likely to cause injury to your child, according to the CDC, are car accidents, homicide, child abuse, suicide, and drowning. Our biggest worries for parents, according to the Mayo Clinic, are snipers, kidnapping, terrorists, dangerous strangers, and drugs. I present that to you a little bit tongue-in-cheek because the reality is that you and I are not truly losing sleep about those issues. When it comes to bullying and cyberbullying, again, I don't want us to be losing sleep. I just want us to take some of the best practices that are evolving and apply them. And to be honest, we are bearing fruit across the nation with what's being done in schools and in communities. I'm a big fan of communication. I feel that many parents, and please don't feel indicted when I say this, but many parents are hyper involved in their kids' offline lives, whether it's dance or football or lacrosse or debate, but they're very hands-off when it comes to their kids' online lives. And like Mike and Senator Menendez said, we need to have these conversations occurring more readily, because otherwise the kids are going to think that the parents are oblivious. I know it's hard to broach these conversations. I know you might feel to yourself, or might say to yourself, oh man, I don't want to use the wrong technological jargon and sound ridiculous, but this is the kids' lives, and we do a disservice to them as thinking of it as just part of their lives. No, it's such a huge deal to them. And I promise you, if you just broach the conversation, they will take it and they will run with it, and they'll have so much to say, as long as you do it in a manner that isn't sort of summarized by being all squinty-eyed and frowning and coming down hard on the technology and demonizing it. No, I think that we do well when we're working with our kids if we come across as fans of the technology and fans of them. I also feel like it's important to share positive stories. And all I mean by that is that, the suicides that we hear about, I know that they're incredibly tragic and awful. And some of these other stories of kids ruining their digital reputation or messing up when it comes to sexting, I think that there's some teachable moments there. But what I believe more is that it's useful to share stories with our kids and our teenagers of others just like them who are doing the right thing out there, demonstrating character, demonstrating integrity, using technology in order to promote a social justice issue. I feel like this has so much value because I remember when I was a teenager, I was surveying the landscape for some individuals, whether they're adults or whether they're kids, that I could emulate, that I could be inspired by, that I could model my own behavior from. And so we see that in epic movies, we see that in sports, we see that all over the place. Share those stories with your kids, and hopefully it'll inspire them also to live a transcendent life. Not get swept up in some of the dramas on a daily basis that they might be dealing with at school, but instead be caught up in some of the dramas that really, really can make a difference across the world. I'm a big fan of Parenting 101 and the things that you might already learn. For example, I feel like we have to educate our kids to know to do the right things. And yes, the schools are doing their part, but we need a united front. If you have some sort of platform in the community, not just being a parent, but perhaps being a coach, perhaps being a troop leader, anything like that, you have the ability to talk about these issues, about appropriate technology use, about being respectful and kind online. And I feel like if you just broach the topic once again, kids will take it and they will run with it. Plus, we do have to discipline our kids. Otherwise, they're not going to learn. And one of my favorite pastors says that discipline is artificially amplifying the consequences of your child's behavior before the choices they make are so big that they scar that child for life. I feel like that's so on point because I have to say to my son, look, if you made the same sort of mistake when you were an adult, you'd be dealing with a broken relationship. You'd be dealing with a ruined reputation in the community, perhaps for years and years. You'd be dealing with termination from perhaps your dream job. And so I have to discipline you now. Plus, we can't abdicate responsibility. Sometimes we see this in some communities where the parents are off socializing so much more and not parenting as much. Again, don't feel indicted when I say that, but it's frustrating because then the schools had to deal with major problems and the parents just needed to be more involved. And I know that those who are tuned into this broadcast, you wouldn't be tuned in unless you cared and wanted to be involved. Again, we can't just delegate it to the school and we can't relegate its importance and say, no, I'm going to talk about this later in life. And we can't mitigate its importance as well. I mean, technology, it's here to stay and it's such a huge part of kids' lives.